So it was Tuesday night this week, and I was cleaning up from dinner, and I just wasn't feeling 100%. I was feeling extra tired. I was feeling a little worn down, and just kind of feeling a little off. And so it was about 6:45, and I just said, I'm just going to go lay down on the couch. And I was planning for just 5 minutes. I was going to go rest my eyes, as my dad used to say when I was younger, and I would catch him napping. He's like, no, I'm not napping. I'm just resting my eyes. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go do that. I'm just going to lay down and then get back up and kind of finish out the rest of the night with the family and the kids. And I quickly didn't just rest my eyes, but I did fall asleep. But I was in one of those places where it felt like you're asleep, but then you're also aware of what's going on around you. We had one daughter who was at soccer practice, and she came home around 7, and I could hear her come in, and I had this awareness that she's home, and Becky brought her home, and I could hear them talking. Then another daughter had new track shoes that showed up that day in the mail, and so she was trying them on. She was running up and down the driveway, just testing them out. I could hear her sprinting, and I was aware of things that were going on, but I was also asleep. And I woke up about 45 minutes later, and I was like, oh, wow, that was not just resting my eyes. That was a full-on nap. But as I woke up, I'm like, I'm not okay. Something's just not right. It was 7:30, and I was like, Becky, I just need to go to bed. Is that okay? And I just went to sleep and wound down and was out for the rest of the night. And then I woke up the next morning feeling better, but not 100%. And I went into that day thinking am I coming down with something? Am I not? What's this going to be? And that's an annoying place to be, right? It's an annoying place to be because you're like, if I'm sick, I just want to be sick and just get into it, get through it, and move beyond it. But if I'm not sick, I just want to be better. There's this kind of frustrating place where you kind of have that feeling of is this coming or not? But it's also at that same time, it's better to have awareness that something might not be right rather than have something be completely wrong and you're clueless about it. There's a story of a young woman who had a similar experience where she got home from work, she made dinner, and at the end of the night, she just wasn't feeling 100%. And it was early, and she decided to go to bed and just kind of sleep it off. But she felt so wiped out and exhausted that she decided to call her dad, who she had plans with for the next day, and just cancel her plans and say, Dad, I'm just not good. I don't think I'm going to be at my best tomorrow. We should just cancel our plans and reschedule them for another time. Now, the dad had this kind of feeling in his gut. He's like, I wonder if she should go to the hospital and just get it looked at. Her mom had recently not been well and was also just going to sleep it off, but he pushed her to go get it looked at, and she got put on some antibiotics, and it cleared up what she was working through. And his daughter comes back no, I'm fine. I just need to sleep it off. I'm going to be okay. And they go back and forth for a while, and eventually he just says, no, I'm going to drive over. I'm going to take you to the ER, and we're going to get this looked at. So he does. He picks her up. They go to the ER, and they run a whole battery of tests, and they couldn't find anything wrong with her, except the doctor noticed that her heart rate was elevated. And she said, well, it's probably just because of the adrenaline of coming here and getting poked and prodded and having all these tests happen. And he said, okay, let's give it 30 minutes. If your heart rate goes down, we'll send you home. If not, we'll take a next step. So she waits for 30 minutes, and her heart rate stays elevated, and the doctor has enough concern to admit her into the hospital overnight. And she's trying to resist. She's like, no, I just think I need to go home and sleep it off. He's like, I really think you need to stay. So she gives in, she stays, and she gets settled into a room and then, again, falls asleep. But over the course of the evening, begins to notice every so often that a nurse comes in. They hooked up an IV because they thought maybe she'd be dehydrated. And a nurse would come in and add fluid and add something else to her IV. And then it came to the morning, and another nurse came in and add something extra to the IV. And then it got to the afternoon of the next day, and they added more to the IV. And eventually she woke up. She'd been sleeping almost 24 hours. And she said, hey, what is all of that you keep adding to the IV? And the nurse said, well, it's some really strong antibiotics, because shortly after you fell asleep, we discovered that you had sepsis. And had you gone home and just slept it off, you may not have woken up. See, it can be annoying and frustrating to feel like, am I coming down with something? Am I not? And just kind of being in that weird place. But it's better to have awareness that something isn't right than to be clueless that something is wildly wrong. Her only symptom, she said, was that she was exhausted. Would never have guessed that she was battling sepsis. It's better to have awareness that something's not right than to be oblivious to the fact that something might be totally wrong and we're unaware of it. And so the question for us this morning, just like this woman, is are we sick and we don't even know it? Not in a physical sense, but more so in a spiritual sense. Are there things not right with our spiritual life that we're oblivious to? Whether it's pride and arrogance ruling our life, we're always thinking that we're right in everything we say and do, and we're constantly trying to prove that to other people. Or is it jealousy and contentment has ruled our life and we're now always chasing something, but we're completely clueless to the fact that it's actually ruining our life? Or have we placed something else in the center of our life other than God and we've ordered our life around it and we're now worshiping that thing, trying to have that thing satisfy all of our needs? Jesus has an interaction with an individual in Luke 5 where this individual knows that something's not right and he knows that Jesus can fix. And in that same little short story, there's another group of people who Jesus is trying to help see that something is not right in their life, and they are oblivious to it. This is what we read. This is Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 27. It says, "After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. 'Follow me,' Jesus said to him." Now, within the scope of this story, this is early on in Jesus' ministry, and he's just started to gather and call his disciples. And what Jesus is doing here is the same thing that we want to be about as a church. And our mission statement captures this. If you're newer to the church and haven't seen our mission statement, it's this, that Meadowbrook Church exists to invite people to discover Jesus and become his fully devoted follower. What Jesus is looking for is people who want to fully follow him. Jesus isn't interested in gathering a crowd just for the sake of gathering a crowd. He's not looking for people to be attenders of a church community. He's looking for people who want to follow him at all costs, who understand his mission, to understand what's at stake, and then to go out and influence their community and the world. And so when Jesus comes to Levi and he says, "Hey, follow me," it's not like, "Hey, let's go grab dinner and hang out for a while." He's saying, "Hey, I want you to come and be my student, be my disciple, and follow me wherever I go." Now, Jesus' strategy when it comes to calling people isn't that he calls the religious elite. Jesus' strategy isn't to call the influential and the powerful, those who are prominent positions in the community. Rather, Jesus calls ordinary men and women to be his disciples. People who, without special training, with people who aren't in positions of power, people who maybe have even been looked over their whole life. I mean, earlier in chapter 5, if you just back up to a few verses prior, Jesus calls Peter, James, and John to be his followers. These guys are fishermen, just working the family trade. They have no special skills or training in leadership or in organizational management or anything like that to launch a movement with Jesus. They're just guys who get in their boat and they go fishing. And as the story of Jesus moves on, once he's gone back to the Father and kind of launched this movement all throughout the Roman Empire, there's this moment where Peter, James, and John are arrested. This is in Acts chapter 4. And they're brought in before the religious elite, the Sanhedrin, those who are trying them to say, "Hey, we don't think what you're doing is right or okay." And they have this back and forth interaction. They escort them out of the room, and then they try and make a decision on what they're going to do with them. And it says that the religious elite were astounded that the followers of Jesus were unschooled, ordinary individuals. Jesus calls the ordinary to be his disciple, to follow him, ultimately to change the world. He calls those not who are the elite or influential, but he calls the ordinary individual. Not only that, but he also calls the outcast to follow him. So we read here in Luke 5 that Jesus is calling a tax collector. To us, we might read that as like, oh yeah, he's calling an IRS employee, right? Again, an ordinary individual, somebody who's a CPA, an accountant, somebody who's an auditor. But again, here, this guy, while he might have an ordinary-ish job, he's actually an outcast in the community because in ancient Israel, tax collectors were thought to be crooks and thieves. In Jewish culture, tax collectors were Jews who actually were working for the Roman Empire. They were people who were collecting taxes for Rome because Rome occupied Israel at that time. They taxed the Jews heavily, but then these tax collectors would extort money from the working class to line their pockets and build their wealth. Tax collectors were thought to have zero compassion, no moral compass. They were greedy, heartless, callous, only thinking about themselves. Basically, they were viewed as betrayers and traitors of their own people. So essentially, you could say tax collectors were the least likely individuals for Jesus to invite to be his follower. They're also the least likely individuals to say yes to following Jesus. But notice verse 28. It says, and Levi got up and left everything and followed him. There's immediacy in what Levi does, immediately gets up. And there's finality. He leaves everything. He completely changes his way of life. He's all in, probably because he recognizes that Jesus has something that he lacks. Like, he has money. He's probably a really wealthy man. He has power and position. He's working for the Roman Empire, the people who are occupying and controlling the Israelites, but yet there's something deep within that's lacking and missing. And so the question for us this morning is, are you in that same place? Do you have a sense that you're missing something in your life, that you are lacking something, and Jesus actually has it? Maybe it's a sense of joy you're lacking. Life feels so humdrum and just blah. But yet, Jesus says, I've come that you might have joy to the fullest. Or maybe there's a lack of peace in your life. It just feels like life is constantly chaotic. It's full of strife, and you're always living on the edge. But Jesus says, my peace I give to you. My peace I leave you. Like, are you able to see that you have a lack in your life? Levi had a lack. We're not told exactly what that was, but there was something that he lacked that he saw that Jesus had, and he was quick to leave everything behind to follow him. Jesus calls Levi to be his follower. Levi says yes, and then the next thing he does is he celebrates what Jesus has done in his life. Verse 29, then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. So this story marks a huge moment of change for Levi. We're not told the specifics of that change, but it's a huge transformation. By the very fact that we're told he left everything, he's leaving his old life behind. He's turning his back on it completely. He probably locked his tax booth, threw away the key, and said, I'm never going back there again. He is not the same guy in this moment that he was in verse 27 because he has said yes to Jesus. I don't know if you've ever had those moments where you notice that somebody is different. One of the joys of being a pastor is getting to walk with people as they undergo transformation and change. I can't tell you how many people I've seen have been down and out. They've been so overwhelmed with life. They've been in relational trouble, financial trouble. They have no purpose. They have no joy. And then you get to walk with them over the course of time and see that they're on a whole new trajectory. And sometimes people are like, that's great for them, but that's not possible for me. And to that I say, says who? Says who? Maybe just only says you. Because Jesus says transformation and change is possible all the time. You're never in a situation where you're beyond hope. It's true for you, just in the same way that it was true for Levi. And he wants to celebrate that change in his life. And what he's doing is he's intuitively sharing it with his tax collector friends. He's leveraging the influence that he has with his tax collector friends to say, hey, come see what Jesus has done for me. At the same time, he's able to do it for you. And he just throws Jesus a party. I mean, what better way to help people understand what God has done for you than to throw Jesus a party. And Jesus is okay with that. Like, he's not opposed to having a good time. He's not opposed to having a party and celebrating. And what this shows is, like, this captures who we want to be as a church. Not just that we want to have a good time and throw parties for Jesus, but the thing that Levi is doing here is the exact same thing that we say we want to be about in our church. Again, go back to our mission statement. It says that we exist to invite people to discover Jesus, to become his fully devoted follower, who in turn will influence the world by inviting people to discover Jesus so that they can become his fully devoted follower, who in turn would influence the world. Do you need me to say it again? Who would invite Jesus or invite people to discover Jesus. Like, that's what we want to be about. Because the best thing about us is him. Like, he has changed my life. He's given me purpose, direction on all sorts of things. That doesn't mean my life is always perfect, but it means I have purpose from one day to the next. That it's not about me. It's about him and living into his story and allowing his story to suck mine up into it. Now, not only do we want this to be of our church, true of our church when it comes to inviting people to discover Jesus and become his fully devoted follower who influences the world, we also want to be the type of church where the least likely of people would come and say, I want to know Jesus. And not only that, but they would be willing to bring their least likely friends to come and experience Jesus. Because that's exactly what's happening here. Levi is the least likely of people to say yes to Jesus. And he's intuitively, instinctively bringing his least likely friends to Jesus as well. And what we see is some people have a problem with that. Like, they know that there's a disconnect in their life. They see that Jesus has something that they're missing. They're not well, and they go to him. But then there are other people like, I don't know if that's okay. Because in this story, there are three groups of people. There's Jesus and his disciples. There's Levi and his tax collector friends. And then there are the Pharisees. And if Jesus is calling people, and if Levi and his tax collector friends are saying yes, and they're celebrating that calling, what we find is that it's the Pharisees who are complaining about it. Verse 30, but when the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? See, what's happening in Luke 5 and 6 is that Jesus is starting to do things that is making the religious elite, the teachers of the law, the scribes and the Pharisees uncomfortable. Because if you back up to the previous story, Jesus is teaching in a home. Somebody brings a man to be healed by Jesus, and Jesus doesn't initially heal him, but he says, friend, your sins are forgiven. Now, there are Pharisees there who are hearing that, and they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Who does this guy think he is? That he has the authority to forgive sins. Only God alone has that authority. And Jesus is like, yeah, I know. That's me, right? To them, that's blasphemous. Means we should execute this guy. The death penalty is the only thing fit for somebody who's claiming to be God. And then you go to the back end of this story. What follows after this is the Pharisees question Jesus and his disciples about their spiritual practices. And then they notice that he's violating the Sabbath, which they're not supposed to do. And they are so disrupted by what Jesus is doing. Now, put all of that aside. Meaning, let's say they actually come to this place where they're like, okay, Jesus, we see that you're God, even though they don't believe that. Jesus, we see that you have the authority to forgive sins. They don't believe that, but just say that they do. He doesn't have to follow the Sabbath because he created it. Put all that aside, meaning they actually believe that Jesus is God. Their perception would be, but you shouldn't call these people. They are beyond the reach of your love. These tax collectors and sinners. Like, it just compounds for them who Jesus is, the things that he's doing disrupt their sensibilities, and now he's hanging out with tax collectors and criminals. He's partying with crooks and thieves. Who does he think he is? And in this moment, Jesus sets them straight. Verse 31, Jesus answered them, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. See, our belief as a church is that the church is supposed to be a hospital and a home, a place where broken people can belong, a place where people who are not well can get healed, a place where people feel disconnected and isolated and alone can find community, family, and a sense of hope. Which what that means is that it's okay not to be okay with Jesus. It's okay not to be well. There's actually freedom in being able to see and know I'm not okay, because then I know who to go to get well. Because the good news of this passage is there is no sickness that Jesus can't heal. There is no sickness that Jesus can't heal. So the calling of the church is to be a hospital and a home, a place where broken people can belong. And for those who think they have their act together, it can be disruptive when people come in who clearly don't. But no one is without the need of grace in their life, and no one is beyond the reach of grace in their life. And this has been one of the things that's been motivating us for this renovation project. It's not just, hey, we want a new building. Hey, we want things to be cool and look clean and neat. Like, we want to be a presence in this community for generations to come. We want to leave a legacy of the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ for our children and their children and their children. We want to be a beacon of hope to the world to say, it's okay not to be okay. I was having a conversation with somebody years ago at Collectivo, 68th and Wells, just talking about this. And I happened to say the church should be a hospital and a home. This guy walks by, this big dude goes, preach it, brother. That's true. He gives me a high five and he walks away. There are people in our community who know that this is what the church is supposed to be. And they have a need for it. They may not even know it, but they do. And our call is to be people who steward what God has entrusted to us so that we can be a beacon of hope to everyone in our community. About a year ago, we put together a video on the why behind this project. Like, why are we taking this on? Why do we think it's important? So it was a pretty long video we showed last year. We've condensed it down. So in case you haven't been with us since then, if you're newer to the church, this gives you a sense of who we're trying to become, who we think God is calling us to be, and the why behind all the work that we've been doing. Go ahead and take a look at this video.
I'm sitting in a building at the corner of 11th and Juneau. This building was once home to the First German Methodist Church of Milwaukee when they built it in 1872. Over the next 26 years, this space was spiritually alive and vibrant. In this very room, lives were transformed by the power of the gospel. In this place, people heard the scriptures taught. They encountered Jesus and experienced salvation. Within these walls, individuals took communion for the first time and entered the waters of baptism. People fully surrendered themselves to the Lord and experienced the life and freedom that only Jesus can bring. For 26 years, this space was a thriving gospel outpost in this community. But as the neighborhood became more industrial, they decided to sell this building in 1898 and move away. And this space hasn't been a church since. For the last 125 years, it's either sat empty or been a restaurant, a brewery, or a pub. And this story isn't unique to this space. In 2019 alone, 4,500 churches closed their doors. At one point in time, those spaces possessed meaningful kingdom ministry, but now many of them have become something else. Church buildings all across the country are becoming converted into concert venues, libraries, banks, bookstores, skate shops, condos, and so much more. We believe that our world needs the church to be alive and active as we move forward into the future. 35 years ago, in 1988, a group of people took a risk and stepped out in faith to pioneer a new kingdom work in our city. They gathered weekly at Hart Park to pray, asking God to launch a fresh expression of the gospel in their community. They were dedicated to doing whatever it took to reach new neighborhoods with the message of Jesus. And they left behind a legacy of faithfulness and commitment to the mission of God. As we look back on our story, we believe that God is calling us into an intentional season of bringing that legacy forward into our future. It's a season that will be marked by courageous faith, a renewed sense of hope, and limitless love. It's a season that might stretch us in new ways, but will have kingdom impact for generations to come. It's a season in which we are moving forward to a stronger future. Our calling as a church is to be a thriving gospel presence in this neighborhood for generations to come. As we move forward in this next season, we want to do so by focusing on three things. First, we plan to move forward with community. One of the heart's deepest desires is to be known and to belong. Our world is riddled with people who are disconnected and alone. We often say that Meadowbrook is a hospital and a home. It's a place where broken people can belong. And we believe that the world is full of people looking for an authentic place where they don't have to pretend, where they can bring their burdens and their baggage and find that they will be received just as they are. Our desire is to create a hospitable environment where people can connect with God and others and truly find themselves at home in God's family. Next, we plan to move forward for the next generation. There is so much young, vibrant life at Meadowbrook, and we are excited at the growing number of young families who call Meadowbrook Church home. We believe that our children and students are the future of the church. And right now, in our church, there are future missionaries and worship leaders, pastors, and youth workers. There are also future healthcare professionals, engineers, business leaders, and educators. We have an incredible opportunity to leave a legacy by training up the next generation to carry the gospel forward for a lifetime. And if we don't do it, who will? Lastly, we plan to move forward into the world. The call of the church has always been to reach the entire world with the gospel. One of our most significant challenges as a church is our limited space. Being a neighborhood church doesn't give us much room to expand. But that challenge is also our greatest opportunity. With the rising number of churches closing their doors every year, the world needs new, local, and innovative expressions of the church. And if we can adopt a multiplication mindset, though our space and our property might be limited, the possibilities for influence are limitless. You know, as I sit in this space and reflect on what happened to this congregation over 100 years ago, it makes me wonder, what would have happened if this church hadn't left? How would our city and this neighborhood have been different? How might God have used this congregation to impact the lives of those who lived and worked right next door? In Meadowbrook's history, there have been defining moments that have set the course for our future. And we believe that this next season is one of those moments. God has called our church to be rooted in this community to impact not only this neighborhood, but neighborhoods all throughout our city, and to impact not only this generation, but also those to come. So, will you join us in moving forward to pioneer a Christ-centered legacy for future generations?
Now, I don't know about you, and I've seen that video dozens of times. And every time I watch it, like it stirs something in me. Now, granted, I'm in it and I wrote it, but like that's my heart. Like that's what God has like put in me to say, like give your life for what counts, Brian. Like know that I'm in the process of making all things new. And there are people in our world who are not well. And there are people in our world who know that they're not well. And then there are other people who have no idea that they're not well. But what I'm doing is coming to make people well, to bring healing and wholeness not only to their individual life, but to communities and the world. And the church is called to play a part in bringing people into the redemptive story of God so that they can find the hope and healing that they need. And my hope and my prayer is that as we move forward, as we finish this renovation project, as we add on a little addition to the back, that we would have vision that it's not about a building. It's not even about our church, but it's about God and helping some of the least likely people like Levi the tax collector, to come to Jesus, have him change their life so that they could go out and be an influencer for the kingdom for generations to come. So I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up, and we're going to close our time just singing a well-known song, Be Thou My Vision, to say, like, in this season, Lord, it's not about us. It's not about a building. It's not about our church, but it's about you and how you are in the process of making all things new. And you're calling us into that story, and you are equipping us with everything we need to be a beacon of hope to a generation in a community that's desperately in need. So, Lord, we give ourselves to you in this moment. We celebrate what you have done. We are so grateful. We are so thankful. It is just mind-blowing how you have provided everything we need and more. So, Lord, may we never lose sight of that. May we continue to hold our life open to say it's all for you. It's all from you, and it all goes back to you. So, Lord, help us to see our lives, that it's not about us. It's all about you. Amen.